one of the two most grueling races in the calendar, drivers losing up to 3 to 4 kilos in a race distance, and sometimes even pushing to the point that they almost pass out. This is the original night race, the Singapore Grand Prix, done and dusted. We had wildlife, yes, lizards on the track, Max not talking to the F1 media, Sainz crashing out in Q3, Lando starting from pole and trying to prove all the naysayers that he is a good starter and can control the race. But most of all, in this grueling heat, it may have been one of the most emotional days for one of the most likable characters on the grid. Let's get into it. This is the Singapore Grand Prix highlights. My name's Lucky. Thank you very much, you beautiful people, for tuning in. Let's get into it. As always, let's go bottom to top of the points finishes. But before that, we need to give an honorable mention for Colapinto, who will also potentially make an appearance in the banger drives. What a move from this kid, right? So I think Alex, despite his previous teammates not being known for speed or potentially pushing Alex, Colapinto 3 races in, he's almost a 10th, 100th or 1,000th away from Alex in qualifying. He pushes Alex to the brink, and it's been relatively extremely hockey stick progression in terms of the tracks, right? Monza, yes, relatively easy. Yes, for me, probably not, but for an F1 driver, easy. Baku, still you have wide tracks, still tight, progressively tough. You come to Singapore, it is a dare circuit, and it is a circuit that rewards risk. And the kid was just thousands or hundreds of seconds away from Alex, who's a seasoned veteran in the sport. And at the start, he threw in a perfect dive bomb in the inside. It wasn't a dive bomb, it was completely controlled. He stopped it. There was a little squirrely moment in the second turn, but he gained his positions, got into the points at the start of the race. Yes, he finished just outside the points, but just wanted to take the moment to commend what a drive this kid's done and how well he's proving, grabbing that opportunity with both hands to increase his chances of getting a F1 drive either next year or definitely the year after. So well done, Colapinto. Last in the points list is Mr. Perez. So he did come from a high from Baku. Yes, he outperformed Max because it was one of those circuits that Perez is good at. There was a sentiment that he might be good at this circuit as well. Yes, slow corners. It's a street track. He's known to be a master of the streets. Yes, myself, I predicted a third place finish for Sergio. He failed in qualifying and he didn't really make much of a headway in terms of progress into the top 10. So he finishes with a measly 1 point, mostly stuck behind Hulkenberg, which is the next on the line. Hulk finishes with 2 points, important points for the midfield battle, especially outside of the Aston Martins. It is relatively a tightly packed fight between the RB, Haas and Williams at this point in time, right? So Hulk securing another 2 points. He actually managed to keep up with Oscar in the first stint, and then unfortunately I think Hulkenberg got undercut by both Alonso and Sainz, but I also don't think he had the pace to keep someone like a Sainz behind, but potentially maybe an Alonso. Ultimately, I think he did another wonderful drive in the post race. He was like, yeah, I'm spent. I just keep the interview short. Wonderful drive. As usual, he outperformed the car in qualifying and he maximized whatever points are on the table for a midfield team. And then Alonso finishing up in 8th, gaining 4 points. Alonso just maximizes whatever machinery that's given to him, right? If you compare that to Stroll was nowhere close to points. Alonso again delivered a wonderful qualifying lap and then maximized the points for that midfield team, again solidifying the point that Aston Martin is probably the 5th fastest car. Then comes Sainz. Sainz had a bad qualifying, right? So he misjudged his Q3 run smashed the rear into the wall. It was interesting that Ferrari didn't necessarily have to replace the gearbox. Thank God they didn't necessarily have to take any further grid penalties. So they had to roll the dice, and I think Ferrari got the strategy on the money with both drivers to maximize their results. Starting at 10th in a track that was supposed to be relatively easier to overtake with a Ford DRS, which didn't necessarily turn out to be the case, they managed to go up the grid to 7th and maximize their points, right? So Sainz did the longest stint on the hard. He was one of the first to stop, undercut the DRS train that he was stuck behind, and maintain that position. He didn't necessarily have pace to overtake Lewis or any other top 4 contenders, but he maximized the most he can get out of the Ferrari. I think Ferrari was probably the second fastest car on the day, especially in the hands of Leclerc, but given the mishaps of qualifying, Sainz couldn't do much. Then we go to Lewis. Lewis was ecstatic yesterday with his qualifying pace. It was one of those moments where he self-reflected and said, yes, I've been working on qualifying for a long time. The car really came alive, and he managed to extract a decent lap to get him to 3rd, right? But just like Toto and his mentality, probably they did roll the dice. They started with a very alternative strategy, either soft, to try and get a position or 2 at the start, but that never panned out, which meant with that strategy, without a safety car, he definitely had to pay the penalty. So he went relatively backwards. So he was one of the first few to stop, and post that, I don't think the hard tyre held long enough. So ultimately, a relatively disheartening day for Lewis, because I think they wanted to go for the win, which again, I understand the mentality, but the strategy didn't work out. There was no safety cars. He had to settle for a 6th. Next is Charles. Charles, I think, maximized the car, and I think it comes down to both driver and the team. Ferrari did a really good strategy as well. They gave Leclerc the right tyre delta until I think 4th was still on the card to take on Russell, but he didn't necessarily have the final bit to bite into 4th position. But he came right back from 9th to almost getting the 4th position, but finishing up in 5th. The team did a wonderful job, and I think in the hands of Charles, as I mentioned before, the Ferrari was probably the second fastest car. So I think all goes down to the fact that qualifying wise, they didn't get it right, and Charles reflected at the post-race interview saying that, yeah, yesterday I was complaining about the tires being very cold, but at the same time, looking back at it, it was probably me just going right into the first turn with cold tires. So no one else to blame, lessons learned, but ultimately Charles did a really good job, and Ferrari did too. Fun fact though, Ferrari got fined 5,000 euros for low tire pressure in FP3. So maybe Ferrari didn't get everything right. But anyway, good day for Ferrari, but I think they would have been a bit disheartened at the fact that they didn't bite into the championship or the Constructors' Championship gap into Red Bull, where they potentially would have had the chance to. We go to Russell. I think the Mercedes probably had the 4th fastest car again this weekend. Again, it shows how peaky that car is, right? So Russell did complain about the tires. They had a very difficult time in terms of finding the right balance over the course of qualifying and practice. During the race, there were moments that the car looked fast, but ultimately I think they've settled, at least again for this weekend, as the 4th fastest car. Russell maximized given the position he was in, plus the fact that Lewis's alternative strategy didn't really play out, right? So he started 4th, finished 4th. I think that's the best Mercedes could have gained this weekend. Let's get into the podium. We got Oscar. Yes, I predicted an Oscar win again. I think it was still on the cards, but I think it all went wrong on the last lap for Oscar. I think he was up on his lap but on the last sector he made a mistake. You could see him showing some level of frustration just after him crossing the Q3 second run. Also the fact that potentially the red flag that came out as a result of Carlos Sainz's crash may have interrupted it. But that said, I think Oscar did another really good job to kind of recover from fifth to get back on the podium, ensure that the McLaren somewhat maximized their weekend with another double podium, and again, right, consistent podiums over the course of the last 6 races. So Oscar's done well, wonderful race. Yes, he kept trying to push Russell to kind of either bluff in terms of the first stint. Then as soon as he got some free air, he went very, very long, and then basically just had the tire delta to overtake both the Mercedes on track. So I think wonderful drive from Oscar again. He was about 1.5 seconds faster in the second stint behind Lewis, and then overtaking Russell post that. Both overtakes, again, a little homage to Daniel Ricciardo, as we mentioned before, right? So in the outside, late braking, yes, you have a tire delta, but it takes confidence. It takes also guts in terms of racecraft. I also mentioned about this in one of the episodes where I did a little bit of a comparison between Lando and Oscar. I'll link it here. But what do you guys think? Do you think that Piastri has a higher ceiling than Lando, or whether Piastri is much more confident sometimes in a race to make those risky but instinctive overtakes that make or break a race sometimes, right? Anyway, that's Oscar. Let's get into the top 2. So we again have the top 2 title contenders at the front. It almost gives me vibes of 2021 to a degree, not that intense at all, and not the same caliber at all, not yet at least, right? But we got Max and Lando in front. Max did what he needs to do this weekend. I think coming into the weekend, he mentioned the fact that getting into Q3 would be a blessing, but he stuck that car in second place, first row of the grids. In qualifying, he had a lovely getaway. Yes, the only tense moment was where Lewis came alongside Max, but rest of the race, it was a pretty lonely race because Oscar was stuck behind the Mercs, so he didn't necessarily have the opportunity to catch up to Max. So there was no undercut threats or threat from the behind because the Mercs couldn't keep up with Max either. So he kind of settled into his pace and kind of maintained second and cruised along. Well, I say cruised along. He maintained his second place, and Max minimized ultimately the damage to his championship lead by coming in second place. And I think a little nod to Ricciardo again. Ricciardo did go out on the penultimate lap and take away the fastest lap from Lando Norris, showing that he is still very much part of the Red Bull family, and ultimately mentioning in the post-race interview that if Max was to win the championship with 1 point, maybe he has a wonderful Christmas gift. Last but not least, we get back to a now multiple Grand Prix winner, Lando Norris. That was a wonderful weekend for Lando. I did not expect him to be this dominant. There was a moment that Lando was 29 seconds in front of Max. That's a full pit stop away, and the race engineer had to almost say, Lando, calm down, just bring the car home. And when he finally got behind the back markers, there was some loss in race time, and he slowed down, and ultimately finished the race 20 seconds in front of Max. But there were a couple of moments where he brushed the wall, or I don't want to say there were lapses of judgment, but it just showed how far he was pushing, and he almost wanted to show how dominant that car is in the hands of Lando Norris, and almost put more of a marker down in the sand to show Max that this championship is definitely not over. He's brought that gap down to 52 points. I think if the McLaren is going to go down this same trajectory with this same dominance, the championship is 100% back on. 52 points, 6 races to go, along with more than 26 points on average over the course of the next 6 races to be gained. The championship is 100% on. Let's have a quick look at the bangers and the blunders for the drives and the teams. In terms of banger drives, Lando, Hulk, Leclerc, and an honorable mention for both Oscar and Colapinto, right? So Lando, as I mentioned, winner. He proved all the naysayers that he can get away well and maintain the race, maintain the pace of the race and lead every lap and win in a street track where it is risky and easy to make mistakes in one of the most grueling environments. So if anyone had any doubts that Lando can't do that, that's put to bed. Hulk maximized again, put that car into a space that it almost isn't conceivable in terms of qualifying. From there and onwards, maximize the points. Number 3, Charles. Yes, he made a mistake in terms of qualifying, partly because he didn't get the tires in the right window, but again, maximized whatever he could with the strategy provided by Ferrari, right? In terms of blunders, I got to go with Sergio and Stroll. Sergio came in a high. He got kicked out in Q2. He only scored 1 point, allowed McLaren to continue to extend their constructors lead. Stroll, on the other hand, it seems like the Lance Stroll project of F1, not Aston Martin, is not necessarily built for him, but more for Alonso. Because if Alonso can consistently score points and be on the top of the midfield, easily fighting for points every weekend, week out, Lance has fallen off of his kind of relatively good form in the midway of this season. So Lance had a bad weekend all throughout, so I'm going to mark Lance as a blunder. In terms of banger teams, McLaren, Ferrari, Haas. McLaren maximized the weekend, double podium. They increased their points gap to Red Bull, further consolidating the fact that they will be Constructors' champion this year. And now the gap is up to 41 points, with both the drivers in tip-top shape. Ferrari, I think it was damage limitation because their qualifying pace was not good, but they got the strategy right compared to the likes of a Mercedes, right? So the undercut actually worked, maximized for both Charles and Sainz. Haas, under the leadership of AO, they seems to be maximizing the points potential every weekend, and Hulk, especially with his outstanding qualifying performances, they are grabbing the majority of the bottom end of the points that they have at offer at this point in time. So Haas clawing into that 6th position. They're only 3 points away from RB, and potentially at the end of the season, if they can consolidate a 6th, that would be a really good change from last year in terms of where they finish in the Constructors' Championship. That's it for the blunders. Let's do a quick race rating. In terms of competitiveness over the course of the weekend, I did think that it's going to be a dogfight between Lando, Leclerc and Oscar over the course of the free practices. And then come qualifying, it was very evident that the Ferraris aren't going to be in the mix and it was going to be Verstappen. But after the dominance that Lando just exhibited over the course of the weekend, and especially on the race, competitiveness wise, it's a flat 5 for me. In terms of strategy, it wasn't massive, but there were some strategic wonders in there, especially from the likes of Ferrari, to ensure that they maximized the points for that car, and also with the likes of Oscar going long and potentially securing the well-deserved double podium. So in terms of strategy, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. Track action wise, despite 4 DRS zones, I don't think that was useful in terms of overtaking unless you had a real tire delta. So you did see some really good moves from the likes of Oscar, Lewis and Charles, where they actually had a clear tyre delta. But all in all, the Ford DRS zone didn't seem to provide the expected overtaking opportunities for that track. So overall, track action 5, and for the fans, I'm gonna give it a 6, and that leaves the overall race at a 5.5. Right, so not a great race, not the worst of the worst races. Just flat. Let's have a quick look at the Constructors and the Drivers' Championship. Looks like McLaren are slowly starting to walk away with this championship. They are 41 points away from Red Bull, and seems like they have two extremely well operating drivers continuing to put more and more distance with Red Bull. Whereas on the other hand, seems like the second place in the Constructors' Championship is up for grabs. Ferrari might leave this weekend disappointed that they didn't maximize, especially with Sergio starting out of the points. But I think they managed to minimize any damages, and if they continue to have relatively the second or the third fastest car, it would be interesting to see how the Constructors' Championship for the second place turns out. Mercedes sticking with 4th. I don't think they're in any competition for that 4th place or in competition for the top 3 places either. Aston Martin solidifying themselves as the 5th fastest. Then again, from there and onwards for the 6th place, I think there's going to be competition, especially if the Williams continue to maximize their opportunities. They seem to have found a relatively faster car, and now with 2 drivers who are capable of getting points week in, week out, there's a potential that we may see a 3-car fight or 3 constructor fights for the 6th place in the name of VCarb, Haas and Williams. Moving on to the Drivers' Championship, Lando's done everything he needs to do this weekend. He's done that ever since we got back from the summer break. He's always outscored Max, and he is starting to eat into that gap. He's 52 points away with 6 races out into the end of the season, with more than 26 points on average available over the course of those 6 races. So the championship is 100% back on. Leave a comment below. Who do you think is going to take the ultimate trophy home for 2024? That's it for the Singapore Grand Prix highlights. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next video. Peace. Ciao.